Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, trying to play a socially distanced concert over Zoom but forgetting your password, or else a scrappy upstart, playing a DJ set at a coronavirus party and forgetting your mask in an attempt to win the door prize, this is your show. Because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's Friday the 14th of August 2020, and I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. Today's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Armando who drove one of those motorcycles that has two wheels in the front, like a trike. So basically he drove a trike with more than one Papa Roach bumper sticker on the back, and he tried to sell you individual Parliament lights that he claimed had been dipped in liquid mescaline. And old Armando would try to charge you about $1,000 for a website that was obsolete in like 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We can have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. Everything you need is there: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, mailing list tools, social media integrations, the ability to crowdfund your next project commission-free. It's a wonderful service. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, I will be on my YouTube channel every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for Sunday Songs. Sunday Songs means that I play some songs of mine. I play some covers of songs that I love. Most importantly, I check out what everyone is requesting in the chat. I answer questions people pose over there in the chat. Listeners talk and interact with one another there. It's very interactive. It's very fun. In fact, we're building a nice little community over there on Sunday nights, including many listeners of this podcast. So come over and be a part of it. That's Sunday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Just head over to YouTube, subscribe to my channel, and you'll be good to go. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. You could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you love. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. If just 1% of our listenership would contribute the amount of a cup of coffee every month, it would make a huge difference for me. If you're not in a place where you can contribute financially, I totally get that. There's still a couple ways that you could help out for free. Firstly, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or secondly, you could just tell a friend about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. I will end all the harassment there. John and I have been playing the same club circuit for years now. Every time I'm on tour, it seems like there are posters for his show coming up there in the club. We've always been ships in the night, though, and have never had a chance to chew the fat until now. So it was really fun to pick his brain, and I hope you guys enjoy our chat. Our guest this week hails from Southern California and now makes his home in Portland, Oregon. John Craigie has turned in over a decade of hard work on the club circuit, building a hard-won fan base for his heartfelt yet tongue-in-cheek folk music that some have described as the love child of John Prine and Mitch Hedberg. He's built his audience playing in venues as varied as house shows, to sold-out amphitheaters, to Burning Man, to the Oregon Country Fair. It's taken a lot of shoe leather to get his music to the people, so he's a man after my own heart. His music is a grassroots favorite on independent music radio stations across the country, including KPIG, KRFC, and WUMB in Boston. He's toured with the Avett Brothers, Sean Colvin, James McMurtry, and many others. In fact, he was hand-selected by beach folk phenomenon Jack Johnson to open a tour of amphitheaters in 2017, which brought his cult favorite music to a much wider audience. Rolling Stone has written of him, "It's hard to immerse yourself in one of his albums and not emerge elated." And Glide magazine has said that his new album, Asterix the Universe, happens to be one of his best records yet. Finally, No Depression, the Journal of Roots Music, calls his latest effort a soft, dreamy place to come to, and for many weary and heavy-hearted listeners, the album might be exactly what they need. John and I caught up on the phone a few weeks ago to talk about his journey so far. John, thanks for being on The Working Songwriter. Before you went down the road, the ignominious road that I've chosen as well as a singer-songwriter, as a troubadour, you kind of dipped your toe into a band world, kind of a rock band world, in college and out of college. Can you describe your start in music?
Yeah, so, when I was in high school, growing up in Los Angeles, it was a pretty square community I was in, so music was not really a common thing. I talked to other people who had, friends who were playing music and dads who were jamming around campfires and stuff. But in my community, strangely enough, there wasn't a single player. So when I got my guitar around 16, it was very, very isolating. I didn't really know what to do or how to even go about music. So going to college in Santa Cruz, all of a sudden I'm surrounded by, basically everyone had a guitar up there. And so that really helped me kind of understand that nature of music. In my high school time was just like guy on the edge of his bed playing Green Day and Pearl Jam songs, and imagining some sort of rock and roll fantasy. But you get to Santa Cruz, all of a sudden there's late night jams in dorm rooms in the woods and things like that. And so, I formed a couple of different musical groups there. And then by the end of college, I had a jam band. We were called Pond Rock at the time. And it was pretty spaced out, like, living room show kind of vibe. But I loved it. I don't know if you ever dabbled in any of that, but it's a good way to kind of like push yourself in the realms of performance and sort of songwriting, I guess, and song structure.
You mean the jam world?
Yeah.
I really have never dipped my toe in it. I think it's just because I never ran into it culturally too much. I think if you're in California in your early 20s, if I had been in California in my early 20s, I would have. What do you think that mentality or that sort of creative milieu brings to songwriting that's different from just like the traditional folk and singer-songwriter worlds?
Well, one thing it did for me that I think helped is at that time, I definitely was writing a lot with the audience in mind. As a jam band, it's not something, our people we were listening to was like Fish and The Dead and things that, were so popular amongst like sort of live crowds. And so I remember thinking a lot about the audience when I was writing these songs. And then it got me out of my head a little bit. So then when I started writing the way I write, it made me want to connect with an audience, not necessarily that was sitting in front of me, but that was listening, as opposed to, writing maybe like too inside or something that would be hard to connect with. And I think that's what that did for me. I don't know exactly if that does it for everybody else, but I remember thinking that a lot as I would, be in these hot, sweaty living rooms or underground, basements or whatever in this jam band, really looking out at the crowd and enjoying the fact that I was entertaining, connecting, moving them in a way. And then when I started doing folk music in the coffee shops, it was a very different way, but I remember, not losing that touch, not getting like too inward that I could would forget that that they are there and we're here to like share together.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And the folk music world can kind of go sometimes when it goes wrong, like radically in the opposite direction, where it's kind of a badge of pride if it's completely quiet when you play and no one's connecting with it, because it's like, well, maybe you just didn't fucking understand me, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. That's all. The folk world is a much more of a battleground. The jam band was very easy. It was you just jam that A major chord and your homie, was on the organ over there wailing and you're good. But getting out there as a solo and being that naked, man, that was something.
Yeah. And so you mentioned kind of coming from a sort of a square-ish community in Los Angeles, dare I say, maybe kind of culturally conservative. What did the people back home, even family, think when you said to them, hey, I've been to college, but now I'm going to be a troubadour? I mean, were people in your life supportive of that? Were they worried? How did that go?
Yeah, definitely not supportive. I mean, it's my folks are great, but yeah, very working class, non-artistic, and very much that life is about getting the work done and family, setting up the stability and comfort and protection for your home and family, and pursuing sort of frivolous desires will only bring trouble. And so I think the only thing was that I never had much promise as like a intellect or a sort of someone I never was good at school, and I never like showed any promise in sports. So they weren't surprised probably, but they definitely wanted me to stop doing it. And unfortunately my like success was such a slow rise that it took a long time for them to sort of come around.
Well, and the ultimate irony, though, is if you're doing this job in a certain way, I mean, it is a very working class lifestyle. I mean, you're working in bars, basically. I mean, I've had some time to kind of reflect over the strange COVID times, and I think at the end of the day, what I really do is I'm a bar worker. I mean, I'm the bar worker that gets to go up on stage and maybe make a little bit of a bigger paycheck. But at the end of the day, I just go into bars every night and sing, and I drive the minivan there myself, and book the hotel rooms myself and all that. And it is kind of a working class thing.
Yeah. Well, I think this was funny. I remember one time my mother and I having a conversation. I think someone my age had just gotten laid off or something, and I was trying to explain, that how I couldn't really be fired. There's no like president of music that will come along. You could, if you suck in this job, you're not going to get fired. You might not get the gigs.
Right.
But it was something that I think I was taking some pride in, the fact that like I have a job, there's job security. Like I don't have a boss. I can't get fired. But I think sometimes parents or people from that generation, that's why it's hard for them in the arts, because they look at you and they're just like, there's no knowing if you're good or not. Like if I haven't been fired from my accounting job, then you can at least assume that I probably don't suck at accounting. You know what I mean?
Right.
But as a musician, I could suck and still, be touring and playing coffee shops and bars. And I think that's what's sort of funny about how that generation views it. There's really they didn't know how to quantify, whether I was like good or that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they did see me grinding it out for years and years. So I think that was something.
Was there a particular point or like a particular gig you had, or a friend at work listening to the music and mentioning to them, was there a point when they kind of got like, oh, he's not completely off the rails here. He sees something that we don't, and he's actually moving towards it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of little things. Again, with my folks, they're so they're not really like in touch with music. So they also had a hard, everyone quantifies musical success differently. As you know this, it's like, you'll have some friends who are like, "Ooh, I heard you on the radio this weekend. Now you've made it." Other friends who are like, you opened for Jack Johnson. Now everyone has this different, sort of qualifier. I think for my parents, it was like, if I wasn't on Jay Leno or, like on the cover of the LA Times, they wouldn't really know how to quantify it.
Mm-hmm.
But about 3 summers ago, I did a run opening for Jack Johnson. We played the Santa Barbara Bowl, and they came out to it. And of course, the irony of that was that was like a very like non-normal gig for me. It was, a huge crowd.
Right.
And but they saw that show, it went well. Jack, was there giving the blessing, and so it seemed like ever since that night, they stopped bugging me about I don't know if they'll ever love it, but they stopped kind of worrying about me, I guess.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. So how did
Yeah.
you go from kind of like that jam world to deciding I kind of want to strike out on my own? Did it just kind of happen slowly, or did you have an epiphany and think, man, I'm going to do this. I think I know how to find my voice in a different way.
Yeah, it wasn't that slow actually. I was always, writing songs by myself and working on the songwriter thing. Always like a big, Dylan guy, Greg Brown, John Prine guy. So, but that was so much scarier and harder to do. And at my time in Santa Cruz, there wasn't really a market for that. The jam thing was easy. There were, any given night, there was some bar was having that. So I kind of got thrown in the jam thing just because I really wanted to play and I really wanted to be involved. But I do remember this one specific night, and it was right around when Oh Brother Where Art Thou, the film, came out, and the soundtrack came out, and names like Gillian Welch and Steve Earle and things that I hadn't heard before were really starting to come up in conversation. And I remember my jam band, Pond Rock, we had a opening band that was a bluegrass band, old timey bluegrass band, and I remember looking out at the crowd, and I was like, oh, jam music's on its way out, and this is what people want. And that's when Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, the festival, started gaining traction in the Bay Area. And anyway, it just, things started to come up where people actually were wanting more of that songwriter guy. And so coffee shops were having more songwriter nights. And so I just started doing it. And then I think just by circumstance of people moving away and things like that, the jam band died, and I didn't feel any desire to go back to that. I was really enjoying the ability. And the main thing for me too was be able to, with my songwriting, I was able to tell stories in between the songs because there was a more attentive audience, which I didn't get to do for the jam band. And that was, I think from there on, it just was very much my calling.
Yeah, so that, like, one of your hallmarks is your ability to, you have a show that's sort of a fusion of songwriting and these songs that you tell in between. Where did you come up with? Did that kind of rise out of the desire to be able to connect with an audience, like you were talking about earlier, with the jam band thing that you learned?
Yeah, I mean, and for me too, I was a storyteller long before I was a musician. As a child, I was class clown / sort of lunch time clown / after school clown. I was the guy, I was the funny kid. And I put a lot of work into that because I didn't have much else going for me. I was kind of funny looking. I wasn't good at sports, wasn't good at school, but I knew that the joke was there, and it can be survival too. I was kind of a scrawny kid too, would get picked on, but the moment you were sort of seen as a comedian, they would let you out. They wouldn't kill you because everyone wants a funny guy around, and so it was a survival technique. It was a trade. In the world of elementary school and junior high, it was something I was using to sort of get by, and so I always had that. Now, growing up in like the late '90s, music was all through the '90s. Music was sort of a serious thing, especially starting with Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And I would go to those kind of shows, and no one said anything. If anything, maybe a hello Los Angeles, but so I never associated the two, but I saw Arlo Guthrie age 19, I think. And that was my first indicator of that you could combine the two things, that you could still be, because there was like Adam Sandler and Flight of the Conchords,
Right.
But I didn't want to be that. And so it wasn't until I saw people like Arlo Guthrie, Todd Snyder, Greg Brown, that I realized that you could still be considered a serious musician and also tell stories and be humorous. And so that was a big eye-opening thing for me. But that came very naturally to me.
Did you see any of those guys early on? Did you see like a Todd Snyder show early on at all?
Well, yeah, Arlo was the one that was the first one I saw in Santa Cruz. I moved there. And then because of the station, I don't know if you know K-Pig in Santa Cruz, but sure. They were putting on those kind of shows. And that was the kind of music I didn't know about as a kid because in LA, there wasn't like a cool Americana station. So so then I just really I dove in deep. So I saw, Todd, I saw Dan Byrne, if you know Dan, Greg Brown, Loudon Wainwright, all these guys that that were doing a version of that. And then I sort of became my my teachers, you know. I just started to really, you know, follow those guys around, research it.
Yeah, Todd, I've seen a couple of his shows. I first saw him, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, and it blew my mind in the same way.
Yeah.
And it really, I think if it's done right, like when Todd does it, I think it actually makes the serious moments in a show more serious.
Definitely.
If you can bring levity in between, people really, they almost like learn to trust you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's very well said. You know, I think that the storytelling, it draws them in. So then they want to listen to what you're saying. And you're right. And you're appearing more human. If you're a total clown, it's, then you might lose them. But if you're ideally, what all these guys were doing was just, talking about their human experiences and showing the humor, usually within the tragedy. And then you're right. And then and that was always for me, like the things that would always hit me the most, people like Richard Pryor, Patton Oswalt. There were certain comedians that I listened to as a kid that I always wanted them to sort of touch that real spot,
Yeah. I think it helps get people's attention. I think that there definitely is a thing in the culture now, and I feel this when I get on stage and it's an audience that's not familiar with my work. There is a very understandable feeling in the culture of just like, oh man, here we go. I got to listen to 30 minutes of another white dude with an acoustic guitar. You know what I mean? And I totally get that. And I use a fair amount of humor in my show, especially if it's going to be an audience that's not too familiar with me, just to let them know, like, man, this isn't going to be that self-serious thing that you get from most folk shows. We're going to have a good fucking time here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you want to break down that wall. I mean, that was always, again, going back to my teenage years, I'd go to these shows and I loved it. I was a kid. I loved seeing Pearl Jam. I loved seeing, Third Eye Blind or whatever. But I never felt like I was like, I knew they were putting a show on. You know what I mean? I never felt like I was connecting with them on a personal level. And once I saw these guys who were just up there with their guitar, but showing me, that it wasn't going to be like this brooding, sort of untouchable thing, that it was going to be something that, that felt familiar, and they didn't take themselves too seriously. It allowed me then to sort of take them as seriously as I wanted to. Does that make sense?
It does. How did you progress through the period? So you kind of, the bands that you were in, they kind of die a natural death. You start this new artistic voice that we've been talking about here. How did it get from, open mics at coffee shops to, hey, I'm getting ready to put together an album. I might put a tour together and leave town and take this to other places. How did you get it to a place where it was more than just something casually that you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, so much slower than it should have. And whenever these like young guys and young women come to my merch table and want advice, I always have to, tell them that, to not do it like I did, even though I'm very happy with my progression. I was I wasn't very confident in what I was doing. Like I said, I didn't come from a place that I felt like I was destined for greatness. And so I took it very slow, and I also didn't know what I was doing. I had no agent for a long time. So the first couple of years I would just play. I knew I needed to make some money because I wanted to not have to work a 9 to 5. So I was doing like a lot of bar and coffee shop gigs that were not very like listening, but you'd get that $300, like winery gig or something. And then I started to realize that every now and then I would get that concert series, sort of the woman would be like, I can pay you $50, but there's going to be 30 people. They're going to listen. They're all going to buy your CD. So then it was a matter of kind of seeking those out and knowing that I could only do maybe 1 or 2 of those a week if I was going to survive. But, and so slowly padding those. But I do remember a moment where I really had to say to myself, once I started realizing that people were coming for a certain thing, the storytelling, the originals, I needed to sort of cut myself off from sort of the drug that was like and I wouldn't even say high pain, but I would say steady pain, bar gig, I had to just tell myself, okay, no more of those. It doesn't matter if you make 50 or nothing. If the crowd's listening, you'll get by. And so, but that took probably, all of that took about 5 years for me to kind of really chisel that down. And the moment I made that decision, then everything started moving forward.
Wow. And how did things move forward for you there?
Well, I started to garner the fan base because I started delivering a consistent show. Because what was happening in those 5 years is that someone would see one of those like quiet sit down shows.
Yeah.
And then next time I came to town, I'm playing at a loud bar and I'm playing covers and not doing the storytelling. And they come to that, they go, forget it, I guess.
Oh,
I guess I was misinformed.
Gotcha. So there was,
and
yeah, I see what you mean.
So I was like sabotaging my own thing unbeknownst to me until I started getting some emails and things like that from people, nicely saying, hey, I really wish it was like this other thing. Even though it was weird too, because the bar gigs were always free. So, they'd say like, look, I would gladly pay the $5 to sit in that woman's living room and hear you do that thing. So once I started just making sure that I gave a consistent show every time, because that's the thing, is like there's so much you don't have control over. But if you can take control over the things that you can, and you can consistently deliver, a good show, then that's when it's going to start to build up. And so I just started noticing that I'd sell out the sort of, 30-person living room thing. So then they'd say, oh, how about we do this club? It holds 100. And then every time, if I gave the right show and always was fresh enough yet familiar enough, that's how it started to grow. Again, still very slowly, but this during this time I loved each show. Didn't matter if it was 30 or 600. If it was what I wanted to do, then I was into it.
And when you say put on a consistent show, does that mean, how do you approach that in between stuff? Do you sit down and do you write out these anecdotes and stories that you want to do? Do you speak them out over a course of a period of time and they kind of reach a final state eventually? Are they always changing? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's funny. So with the stories, they're not like, I think sometimes people think it's completely off the cuff. And that's definitely not my style. I'm not really an improviser. What will happen usually is a thing will happen within my life. And I'll say, this is interesting. Maybe I'll try to tell this on stage tomorrow. And I will, and it'll either connect or it won't. If it connects, then I will continue to tell it. And for me, storytelling is always like a thing that has to be like worked out in front of people, There have been times where I've thought, oh, I have a funny like concept and premise, and I'll be driving and I'll like I'll like speak it to myself. But that you never know, because there's no timing there. There's no pause for audience reaction. So really everything I'm doing each night is sort of the story as it's growing. And I always tend to, not want to tell the same story to the same audience. So I take notes after each show. Okay, what did I tell tonight? And then I have a notebook that I travel with. So then when I'm back in Boston again, I'll check, okay, what did I do in Boston last time? Oh, okay. But also too, it seems to me that stories have their cycles. I tell them, sort of per a tour, and then I semi-retire them. Now, when you're dealing with something that's a story behind a song, that can be tricky. I love Arlo Guthrie, but, I think I heard like the motorcycle. I don't know if he has the motorcycle song.
No.
Are you familiar with that one?
I don't know.
I don't want a pickle, just want to ride on my motorcycle.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So it's a very silly song, but he's sort of famously known for like expanding upon what that means, and it's a really sort of funny story. But I think he's probably been telling it for 40 years or so, and that's fine. And no one seems to complain. I'm a lot harder on myself that I definitely want to keep it fresh. So certain things, though, if it's really important, then I will give a version of that. But it would drive me crazy to tell like the same story each night, verbatim. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I find I end up retiring in between stories, both for the reasons that you're talking about. You don't want to tell it to the same audience, but also I find, and maybe you have found a similar thing, I find if I have something that is funny and really working and it kind of reaches its final state, it then has like a a shelf life for me of like 3 to 6 months where I can't tell it as good because I've become so confident in telling it that I kind of like rush through it in a way, and it kind of reaches a peak, and then all I can say is it's not ripe anymore after that. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, there's definitely a sweet spot. You know, there's those first couple weeks when you're still getting it, really nailing it, and then there's that sweet spot where it's fresh to you and you're living it, you know, and you're telling it in that same way that you would be excited to tell your friend what happened yesterday.
Right.
And then there's that point, and you'll see this with, like, I don't want to knock anyone, but have you ever been to like a professional storytellers, like convention or professional storytellers event? People who like have been telling the same story for like 10 years, it feels like it's like a monologue, you know, it's something that they're like a play they were in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You know what I notice about when people do that is when they have it down pat, they're telling it, and then if the audience reacts in any way that they weren't expecting, they don't like internalize it, and it doesn't change the rest of it because it's not a conversation. It's almost like an annoyance so that they can get on with the rest of the monologue. Yeah,
exactly. It would be like if you were doing, you know, Hamlet's soliloquy and somebody like, you know, booed at one part, and you're like, wait, that's the part everyone's supposed to gasp at or cheer at. And so I never want to get to that moment. And I think there are some times, where I'll feel that. And I just really always want to challenge myself. And I always reference this silly moment from when I was 17. It's embarrassing, but I saw Third Eye Blind 2 nights in a row. They came through Los Angeles and played like the Roxy or something. I saw that. Then me and my friend drove to Irvine the next night and saw them. And I don't know what we were thinking. It's Third Eye Blind. It's not the Grateful Dead. But we get there, and it was the exact same show, like verbatim. And he was doing some little like interludes between songs, but it was, you know, word for word. And at the time, it really disappointed me. Now, look, I read later that they had done like a 200-day like nonstop tour, and they were probably just like, you know, had lost their minds. And I don't want to knock them or anything, but it embedded in my head to like, if I ever became, you know, someone who played in front of crowds, I was aware how disappointing that was. And I'm not the kind of artist where people are, you know, going from town to town, but it happens sometimes where someone will do 3 nights in a row or whatever. And I tease them all the time because they may have to hear a similar version of a story, but I always want to make sure that I'm not just like reciting something. I'm here to tell these people what happens, you know?
Yeah, it's really, I struggle with that. When I'm really on my game, the shows are varied night to night, but man, if it has been a longer tour, or if I've just been busy with other aspects of life and I haven't been able to write anything else, like I can rip off 10 days in a row where the show, you could probably put it on a grid in like a, you know, in a Logic session, and it would just line up like exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, that's true, I think, too, of how sweetly you're connecting with your audience. When it's one of those nights and you're right there with the audience, you're adding things, you're like, when I tour with, like my bass player or something, she will notice that. She'll say, oh, tonight was great. You really were able to like stretch that bit out a little bit because the crowd was good. And when I was doing those Jack Johnson shows, again, no disrespect to those crowds, but when you're doing 18,000 people, there's no way I'm going to be able to like vibe off of them. You know, it's an insane ocean of energy. And those shows, I was definitely had to kind of go up there also because it was so distracting. I had to focus, and I was really delivering a lot more of, like you were saying, those sort of like calculated stories with no riffraff, just like tell the thing that happened, play the song, and let's get the hell out of here. You know what I mean?
I know. You know, the thing, I haven't done a ton of gigs that have been that big, but sometimes when I have, you know, gotten on like some sort of tour where I'm going to be playing to a lot more people, a couple thousand people, and it's going to be outside, and you know, I'm playing maybe sometimes while the sun is still up. I have to really remind myself, like, I'll get off stage and I'll be like, damn, I didn't really connect there. But if there's just like 5% of that audience that is listening, that's still more people than would come to one of my shows anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you really do have to like focus in and just kind of do your show in that situation and just trust that it is reaching people, because it is.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the thing that Jack said to me, you know, when he offered me the Gorge, you know, I told him that he was out of his mind, you know, that because he had really tapped into this live album of mine that's recorded here in Portland in the Mississippi Studios to about 160 people or so. And Gorge is like 22,000 or something. And I said, what would you expect me to do there? And he said, I want you to do your thing, man. You tell your stories just like the live album. And I told him, I said, that's to 160. He said, well, just think of it this way. If 1% of the Gorge audience is listening, that's still more than your album. And I was like, well, thank you for putting that into perspective. But, that 1% might be scattered, sprinkled like salt throughout the crowd. And you're right. So you have to, there's a lot of trust. And of course, that's happening. You find out later because those people come up to you at your smaller shows and say, oh, I saw you at this thing. But it really made me realize that I never want to strive for that world. And to me, the best shows are when we're all together and I can really feel everyone in the crowd and then I can have that conversation.
There's something about John and his spirit and attitude that reminds me in the best way of the American beat poets of the 1950s and 60s. A willingness to hit the open road, a devil-may-care attitude towards well-laid plans, a wry sensibility about the impermanence of life. Here's a wonderful passage by Kenneth Rexroth, a forerunner to the beat poets, that echoes the same sardonic take on existence from his poem Air and Angels. As I watch at the long window, crowds of travelers hurry behind me. Rainy darkness blows before me, and the great plane circles, taxis to the runway, waits, and then roars off into the thick night. I follow it as it rises through the clouds and levels off under the stars. Stars, darkness, a row of lights, moaning engines, thrumming wings, a silver plane over a sea of starlit clouds and rain-bound sea. What I am following is a rosy, glowing coal shaped like the body of a woman. Rushing southward, a meteor afire with the same fire that burns me unseen here on the whirling earth, amongst bright, busy, incurious faces of hundreds of people who pass me, unaware of the blazing astrophysics of the end of a weekend. When did you make it out of Santa Cruz? You're in Portland now, not just to your new home, but when did you start touring the nation more broadly?
So that was the first thing I ever did. I was still in Santa Cruz. I started teaching briefly after college. I had a degree in mathematics from Santa Cruz, so I taught math for about a year, and that's when I decided I hated that, and that's when I decided I got to go for this. So I started doing those kind of coffee shop tours right around age 24, and then pretty quickly I couldn't afford to live in Santa Cruz, so I moved up to a town called Ukiah, if you know that. It's in Mendocino County, just about 2 hours north of San Francisco. Very, very like rural and very cheap, and so that helped me kind of have my rent low, and that was sort of those years I was talking about of kind of wandering aimlessly, but I was going all over the country, playing bars, coffee shops, and of course every now and then, the house concert.
Oh, so you were
concert series.
So you were heading that. Okay, so that part that you had just described, that was all over the place. That's right. And were you booking the stuff yourself that time? Or
yeah, and this was back, not to sound like I'm an old man, but it was back in the day when it was. I don't know how it is now, but it was just like you would just call the place and say, "Can I play?" And then they would say, oh, "What do you sound like?" And you'd send them your website or your Facebook or whatever, and they'd listen to it. You have to call again to remind them. I would notice that if I just called enough, they'd eventually just let me play.
Yeah.
But then those concert series would usually come about because somebody the word started getting around in a very small way. So someone some sweet lady who did the 30-person thing at her place, she'd find me somehow and, "You want to do this?" And I would sometimes book a whole tour. Let's say there's a house concert in Florida, I know that's going to be good. She says she always sells it out. You know, I'll drive. What else am I doing? And so I would book a whole tour to there, and that might be the lowest paying gig of the tour, but it might be the funnest. And then along the way, find other things. And then I got to a point where I could do a thing where if I was doing bar gigs, but I realized there was a group of people that were coming to the bar that wanted to hear the quieter thing, we would set up a house concert with one of them and just do a, you know, $5, $10 cover. And then from there, keep doing that. So it was very grassroots though. And it was very much just from the help of my fan base from the day one was always there. They were my manager. They were my record label. They were my booking agent in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. Well, and I also think building like that, there's a lot of bands and a lot of artists that they have, if their listenership is a mile long because they didn't build it that way, it's an inch deep, you know, and if you build, I've spent the last 12 years driving around the country in a rented minivan, you know, doing that thing. And I've really found during this COVID time, what's been really cool is I'm like, wow, everyone's got my back. And the reason everyone's got my back is listeners, is because I've probably shaken hands with every one of these freaking people over the course of the last 12 years, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. That's crucial. And that's what, you know, that is really, I think in the modern day, that's job security. You know what I mean? Yes. Whereas if you skyrocket in 6 months and, you know, you got a bunch of people that are excited about that one song they heard, if you don't connect, if you don't deliver, or if you disappear for 6 months, then they'll forget, you know. But if you are part of they have stories about shaking your hand, meeting you, running into you at the health food store, you crashing on their couch, whatever those things, you're a part of your story is their story, and your success is their success in a way, and that's something that, you know, it felt like a Rocky movie, but in a very, very long, drawn out thing, you know. I was joking with a friend about if they ever made a biopic about myself or, you know, some of my other friends, you know, it would be 12 hours long, and in the first 2 hours, like, God, man, this guy's still playing coffee shops? Like, when are we going to get to the clubs? Like, oh, that'll happen about the 6 hour mark, you know. So I think that, I think it's great, but I love that, you know, and I wouldn't trade it for anything because, you know, for lack of a less cheesy statement, you know, it's really about the journey, you know.
It is. You've also made records in a similar kind of organic way. I noticed that you, from what I've read, you tend to work outside of a studio system. You like to make records sometimes in houses, in rooms. Am I getting that right? Is that the way that you traditionally work? So what's the reasoning behind that, and what do you get out of that you might not get out of a more traditional studio setup?
Well, you know, originally for me, it was about affordability. I could never afford a studio in the early days. And I had friends who were down to make a record with me. And so I would find a guy who had, you know, the gear, basically a Pro Tools and some mics. And then we would find a space, usually at someone's house, that would let us set up. And in the first few ones, they came out fine. But, you know, I think we were still kind of playing by studio rules, which is like 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. kind of thing. And that was fine, but it wasn't until I got to meet Todd. I did a couple opening runs with Todd Snyder, and he said something to me just really simple, but very wise. We were talking about recording, and he said, yeah, isn't it weird how in our career, all of our music is done at night, starting at 8 p.m., you know, till midnight or whatever. And all of a sudden now we're supposed to be able to, you know, harness this mojo at 11 a.m. And I don't know how Todd records, but that made me realize, like, yeah, what the hell am I doing? And so from then on, I decided that, you know, the days would go more like, you know, 3 to 3 or 6 to 6 kind of thing, you know, starting in the afternoon, evening, knowing that things aren't going to really cook till 11 or midnight. And so there was no studio that was going to be down with those hours. So I needed to find an engineer and a house that was just sort of, where time was kind of meaningless. And that's been part of it. Also, just because I wanted everyone to feel very comfortable. You know, my favorite musical moments always are those moments like at the after party, at the campfire, when everyone's completely uninhibited and just playing together, singing together. And the only way I could think that you could recreate that would be to get those people together in a place where you could forget that there were microphones in a living room, preferably like their own living room, you know.
Are musicians that you bring in for those sessions, are they surprised working it that way?
I think so, but I think they seem to be very content with it. And again, because I'm not a person who strives for perfection in those cases. I really want the rawness, so I never want to do more than 6 or 7 takes. If we get to that point, we just take a break and move on to another song. And yeah, I always tell the engineer, you know, just let it run. If we need to know if it's running, we'll ask you, but we don't need to be like putting that pressure of like, okay, and we're, you know, kind of thing.
Totally.
That's something, and that's probably more for me. I think the people I hire are a lot more professional than I am and could probably knock it out either way. But for my own sanity and my own enjoyment of it, I need that. And, you know, I also for me, the studio albums are so strange. I love having an audience, and live albums make more sense to me. If I can gather enough people in that living room, it'll feel like, you know, I mean, a little show, a little house concert. And that helps me a lot too. Yeah.
I can get that. The only time I made a record that kind of felt like that, we didn't exactly work those hours, but we did a deal where for cost reasons, me and the band slept at the studio, you know, had all our meals there, all that. And I've just been going back over it because I've been thinking about doing like a B-sides record or something like that. And I've been listening to the stuff from that session, and I've been like, man, the stuff from this session is its own little environment in a way that other records have not been, you know, an environment like that. Like,
you build that little world. Yeah.
It just feels like things are cut from the same cloth in a way. And I think that you can make records that aren't that sound good, but there is something really unifying about recording in that way.
Yeah. I think, well, people have said this about the record that I've done that way, that it all sounds like it just happened in one night. And in a way, it did. I mean, it was maybe stretched over 5 nights, and probably the same for you, though. But if you didn't leave that space, you know, if you slept there and ate there, it was really like one long night, and you guys really were it was one long session, as opposed to, you know, like you said, other records that would be stretched over the course of a few months, you know, take breaks, come back, the mics get moved, the drum set gets moved, you know. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's going to lose that feeling of wholeness. And you know, moment.
Yeah. So maybe it wasn't the same night, but it was the same case of beer, night to night.
There you go. Exactly. And that's what matters.
How has your songwriting process changed or evolved over the last 10 or 15 years, if it has at all?
Yeah, I suppose it has evolved. That's a very good question. Let me think. I think that the more comfortable you get with, I guess the more you trust your audience that they will get you, then that's very liberating. And so there would be moments, I think, maybe 10 years ago, where I would say, oh, I can't say it like that. And I'm not saying something like offensive. I just mean something that maybe was too blunt or too like non-poetic, I guess. And because I hadn't really I didn't know my audience, and they didn't know me. I guess I have developed maybe a little bit more of a comfort in songwriting, where now I say what I want to say, and I just have that sort of trust that it will be understood. And it's allowed me to be a little bit more blunt and a little bit more. I guess I kind of got over poetry at some point, and I really wanted to be obvious. Does that make sense?
Well, it sounds like what you're describing there is just a voice, whether it's poetic or not, or funny or not. Like it's a voice, and it's so true. I think I did an interview with this podcast with that guy Ian Mackay from Minor Threat and Fugazi, and I was talking to him about why. I was like, why aren't you creating and releasing more? And actually, in the interim, he has released a little something. But he said to me, well, when I was in Minor Threat and when I was in Fugazi, I knew who I was writing for. He was like, I was at a high school with the people that we were passing out these tapes to. Like, I literally knew the people that I was writing for. And he said, now I don't know who I'm writing for, so I can't write. And that really hit home for me. And that sounds like the opposite of what you have going on. Like it's as if, when you put out a record, it's almost like the people that are going to be there in Chicago for your gig. The people that are going to be there
Well,
in Atlanta.
I should say this. What he said, that is actually very true. In the beginning, you like your audience is your friend, and so you can actually you can write a song about Steve, and then everyone will get it. And I think that is a mistake that young songwriters make. Sometimes when they leave their friend group, they're still singing about, they're putting too many inside things in there. And your new audience is kind of like, we don't know who Steve is. We don't get this joke. So I misspoke a little bit in the sense that you're right. You have to enter into a world where you don't know exactly who's going to be out there. But I think that what I meant is that I've been able to be, I think that they understand where I'm coming from more. And so something that I would be worried would be taken the wrong way. Now I feel like a much more confidence in my bluntness, but I still have to keep it understandable. But there are also inside jokes that you can make. You can reference yourself, and you can can reference a story another time. So, but that's very true what he said, and that's something I give advice to younger musicians who talk to me, is that there is that moment. I joke about this. There's that moment when you're at a show and someone's in the audience that you don't know, and it's weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, what are you doing here? And they're like, oh, I just like your music. And you're like, oh, that's strange. Because in the beginning, you're just telling your friends to come, and your friends come, and you're kind of begging them to come, and you're pushing them to come. And then you reach a moment where all of a sudden people are just coming on their own, and it's kind of freaky. But it's obviously,
man. I still remember mine. I got my start playing in Chicago, and there was a club there. I think it was a jam band club of all things. It was called Martyrs. I don't know why I was playing there.
Yeah.
But so I got this gig, and my 10 or 15 friends who I would do like the open mic night would come out to the gig, like that type of deal. And I remember I was getting like a beer or a sandwich in the takeout place next door before the gig, and I met some people that I didn't know that were coming to the show to hear me, and I still have yet to have my mind blown more than that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very strange.
You realize that there's a medium getting your message out there at that point. At that point, I guess I think they literally heard my songs on MySpace or something like that.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about what it's like. You're getting ready to release a new record now. What is it like to release a new record in the age of coronavirus, and how are you going about it, and how are you feeling about the whole thing?
Well, it's very easy to do, but I think it's still up for debate as to whether it's as efficient as being able to tour. The thing for me is that it's so hard for me to quantify anything in these times, because all of my life has always been based around nonstop touring. And so anything that happened that was good in my career, I would just sort of attribute it to the constant touring, whether or not that was actually true. As you know, with music, the way it finds a new person's ears is completely random. There's a million ways that this person hears your music, and sometimes it has nothing to do with something you did. Other times it has everything to do with what you did, and all your hard work. So when it was discussed as to whether or not I should delay the release of this, I was against that, just because I hate to delay releases of music. I want everything to be as fresh as it can be, as far as just like my own emotions. So ideally I would love to record something and have it be out the next day, but we all know that it doesn't work that way. So it was already, about 10 months from when I actually recorded it. So I was happy to put it out, but it does make me sad to not be able to go out there and sing the songs and tell the stories behind them, which is really my favorite part of the album release tours. It's just it's almost like, like if you watch a movie and you like the movie and then you go watch it with the audio, like DVD commentary.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I feel like I'm doing, like during the album tour. It's like, okay, you've heard the album. Now here's like what was going on, and I have my anecdotes from it. And I really want to give that to the crowd, because some songs have some great stories behind them, I think. And I know I'll just have to do that later. But I wish I could do it now.
I know what you mean, though, about not wanting to delay a release. It has less to do, for me, it has less to do with like the release itself for that album, and it has more to do with like my current creative desire. Like if I'm still waiting on putting out a record and touring behind it, I'm not ready to start basically to start getting ready to make another baby. You know what I mean? Like I'm not ready to start writing again until the circle has kind of been closed on an earlier creative endeavor, you know?
Yes, that's very well said. Yeah.
Well, John, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with our podcast. I appreciate it, man. I've been following you from afar. We work a very similar circuit, the two of us.
Yeah, we do.
I got turned on to your music years ago, and I hope we get to cross paths in real life one of these days, brother.
Yeah, man. You too. It's always a pleasure. You know, your name comes up all the time when I'm talking to my fans, and I've always loved what you put out. So I hope we can meet someday.
Okay, brother. Good to talk to you. Take
Thank
it
you,
easy.
Joe. Take care, buddy.
That's our show for this week. It was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. John Craigie's latest album is entitled Asterix the Universe, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.